and welcome to the Good Health Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Good, a registered nutritional therapy practitioner and functional medicine practitioner. Join me as we explore thyroid, brain, and fatigue conditions with positivity. From Hashimoto's to multiple sclerosis, chronic fatigue to adrenal dysfunction, I've got you covered. With expert advice and tips to help you take action now and inspiring real patient stories from successful individuals who refuse to let their health hold them back. Start your journey to good health today. And don't forget to come and join the conversation on Instagram at good_health. That's GOODE. Or visit my website at nicolegoodhealth.com to find out more. Welcome to this week's episode of the Good Health Podcast. Today we're welcoming Rachel Philpotts talking about burnout. Rachel is the founder and the clinical director of the Renutrition Functional Medicine Clinic, which utilises root cause testing and ultra-personalised health programmes to help tired and wired career women to wake up feeling energised, focused, and ready to fulfil their true potential. She holds an MSc in personalised nutrition alongside qualifications in functional medicine and neuro-linguistic programming. Rachel is also a health writer and has contributed to various publications, and she's also recently published her first book, The Burnout Bible, How to Tackle Fatigue and Emotional Overwhelm Naturally, which instantly became a #1 Amazon hot release in 7 medical and health categories. Rachel's scientific research into stress, alterations in brain chemistry, and major depressive disorder was published by the Journal of Affective Disorders Reports. Okay, so today we welcome Rachel Philpotts to the Good Health Podcast, and I'm so excited to have Rachel here with me because we work in very similar areas, which means that we've got an awful lot in common, and therefore there are so many different things that we could discuss. And that was one of the things I found as I was researching for today's episode, which mostly involved reading Rachel's newly published book, The Burnout Bible. It was really hard to pick areas of conversation because there was just so many things that we could delve into. Rachel, I'm so pleased to have you here. Welcome to the Good Health Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've recently published your book, The Burnout Bible, and can you just tell us a little bit about why you specialised into burnout to start with? Was it a personal journey, or was it an area that just excited you? What's the kind of backstory to lead you where you are today?
Yeah, so it's definitely a personal journey for me. So burnout is something that I experienced personally. It was back when I was working in corporate, quite a successful commercial journey, enjoyed what I did, but I just kind of worked too hard and burnt out. And it was during the time that I was resting and recovering from that experience that I discovered functional medicine. And I guess the changes that I made personally, and the more I understood about myself and my own unique needs, that led me to become really interested in this subject area. And yeah, I think just seeing anything firsthand and experiencing how well you can feel when you've not been feeling so good, definitely inspired me to question my current career and decide to leave it behind me, retrain, and really specialise in this area because I wanted to help others so that they could feel the benefits of this, so that they could step off the emotional roller coaster of burnout, wake up thinking clearly, to give them back their mood mojo the way I was feeling, and really help them to fulfill their career potential. So that's why burnout.
I think a lot of us get into what we do through a personal story, and I think it's nice for people to hear that in a way, because it's sort of, I think when you're a sort of practitioner, you're a professional in this area, and people think we've totally got it together and we're like super healthy and we don't do anything wrong, wine, none of this sort of thing. And I think actually it's quite nice for people to see the kind of the human behind that, of actually, a lot of us have actually been there, and yes, now we have a lot more knowledge and we know what to do to help ourselves. None of us are perfect, but we have that personal story, and I think it's really nice for people, for the listeners, to hear that and know that there is that sort of journey behind it. And what led you to writing the book? Because it's obviously it's a huge undertaking, but what was it? Something that you always wanted to do? Was it a way of reaching more people and helping more people? What was sort of the reason behind it?
Yeah, I've been asked this question quite a lot actually recently, and I've been reflecting on it. And I definitely was somebody, like many people, who always wanted to write a book, was an enthusiastic reader and was a writer, as a young girl. But back then, I think I thought the book I would write would be more like a murder mystery or something. Like, I was obsessed with Nancy Drew when I was younger, so I think I thought it was going to be something like that. But I think, as life kind of takes over and you quickly get into your career path, you sort of forget about book writing, or actually you've probably not got anything particularly to say, because I think you need to have something to say when you write a book. And I think then the career change, working in clinic, that sort of converged at a point in time where I felt like I had something to say, and that motivated me to write the book. But also, I think I soon realized in clinic that you can only help those people that A, know you or know about you, and two, or B, sorry, A and B, B, that can afford your services. So functional medicine is still very much private healthcare in the UK. So I was quite conscious of that. And the book for me then is a way of increasing reach and being able to help more women than I can in the clinic. So that's the motivation behind it. So that kind of young writer and that motivation sort of converged at that perfect moment in time, and that's how it's happened.
I think that's great. It is a great way of being able to help and support more people, because like you said, functional medicine is still very much a private health. I mean, it doesn't even come under private healthcare. It's outside of paying for that. So it is nice to be able to help and support people who maybe, can't come and join us one-to-one in clinic and things like that. So for those listening who are maybe not sure, or for those who've maybe had some confusion around this area, because we know that doctors are, they commonly sort of say that adrenal fatigue doesn't exist, or at least a lot of doctors do. And I've talked about the misrepresentation around this term quite a lot on my social medias and with clients. And, we've got a lot of terminology in this area. And as practitioners, I don't know how you refer to it, but I tend to, when I'm in practitioner mode, refer to it as kind of HPA axis dysfunction or adrenal dysfunction. In public, I tend to say burnout. The reason being is people tend to understand adrenal fatigue or burnout more than they do sort of the more technical terms. And this has kind of created this confusion maybe around the area as to whether it's an actual thing, whether it exists, whether it is a medical term. And, what would you say to people listening, when we're talking about burnout? What is it that you're talking about? And, does that exist? Is it a thing?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. So if you typed burnout into the NHS website, you wouldn't get any results. So it's not a recognised medical condition necessarily, but it is a recognised occupational syndrome. So the World Health Organization has recognised it as such. For me, when I'm talking about burnout, it's synonymous for me with occupational exhaustion. So that end state that occurs following a period of chronic stress. So there are kind of scientists and researchers out there who have defined burnout, the most popular one being Maslick, and she uses the three-dimensional model where she talks about emotional exhaustion, occupational cynicism, and reduced personal achievement. But I think when many of us think of burnout, we also think of the non-work related factors that can contribute to that feeling. But I think it's really important to state that it is that occupational element that distinguishes burnout from other stress-related mood disorders. So when you think of things like generalized anxiety or major depressive disorder, which can, result from chronic stress and have some overlapping symptoms, they are distinguished from burnout because they can occur from an occupational or non-occupational background, whereas burnout is linked with this occupational exhaustion. So there is that key link back to what's happening in that working environment.
And do you include, occupation, obviously we're talking work, do you include kind of the modern day fast-paced life within that? Because obviously some people might be thinking, well, I feel burnout, but maybe they only work part-time or something like that, but they're also a mum and they're juggling a family and they're juggling.
Absolutely. It's everything together, isn't it? It's all that combination of things. And that's why I was saying that we'll also recognize that with chronic stress, it can come from anywhere. I think the thing that I'm only saying is that there will be an element of occupational stress in the mix when we talk about burnout. But that doesn't always have to be that could be happening anywhere and anyway, and it could be actually something happening in your personal life that is almost a straw that breaks the camel's back. It's not necessarily that, but they're all contributing factors that are occurring as a result of all this pressure that we put on ourselves to, be the best at this, I've got to be doing this job at the same time as being a mom, at the same time as looking after elderly relatives, and all these things that are going on in life. So yeah.
I think the thing I get a lot of people saying to me is, particularly actually with the sort of the high flyers, the high achievers, a lot of them say to me, but I love my job. Like, because they love what they do lots of the time. And they maybe don't recognize it as a stress, even though it is putting a stress on them. Or, the stress could even be that, with their job, they're flying all around the world all the time, and things like that. And they're not looking after their health properly and that sort of thing. But a lot of them said, like, but it's not my job because I love my job.
Yeah.
You can love your job but still be stressed by
absolutely. I used to travel a lot in my corporate job, and everyone, I all the time I would get comments of people saying, oh, all that travel, you must be exhausted. And I used to say, but I like the travel. I like it, because you don't realize the toll that is actually having on your body, up and down, up and down. And also that takes you out of your environment where you can prepare your own food, and you're kind of relying on other conveniences, and you're socializing with whoever you're with when you're down there, and all those factors that kind of add up. And then when something does then negative happen in that environment, all that travel and all that stuff that's going on, all that stress is the context in which burnout can occur. So it's not necessarily that that's the one thing on its own, but that's part of the environment, isn't it, that's happening in. So yeah, you're right.
And why do you think burnout has become such an issue for people today? Because it's for me, it's something that's coming into clinic more and more. It's it's a big issue with people. Cases are kind of exploding in this area. More and more people working in immune health. I'm obviously passionate about this because I often see people that come to me with burnout, and actually they've now got immune health issues because it's triggered something in autoimmunity. So I'm very passionate about people jumping in early and getting to the bottom of it. But why do you think it is a growing issue and it's become more of a hot topic, I guess, within the health world?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different things. I think that we're all struggling a little bit more post-pandemic. That was kind of a big global shift. It's changed the way that we worked. A lot of us are working from home a lot more now and becoming more isolated, which creates stress in and of itself. But I think even that aside, we live in a society where that expects more of us, and there's a lot more self-pressure. I think there's almost being busy is almost this badge of honor that we feel like we need to kind of live by, and that's that sort of pressure and information overload, living in an age where everything's instant. We were never designed to cope with that. we're still very much those prehistoric human beings that kind of went out of the cave, went and hunted for some food, dealt with a threat, resolved it, came back, and had a celebration with the tribe. And we're not living like that anymore. And I think that's why, and the more we move away from that natural or the kind of prehistoric hunter-gatherer nature, the more we're going to see burnout, because our bodies just aren't able to cope in that way. We've evolved so fast from in a technology perspective, but our biology just hasn't kept up, basically.
I see, because we actually haven't, we think we've evolved when we look back at our ancestors. We think we've evolved massively.
I know.
The world has evolved massively around us, but we as humans actually haven't evolved much at all.
No, exactly.
So one thing, and there were so many things that I loved about your book, and if people haven't picked up a copy of it, I highly recommend that they do. But one of the things that I loved about it is the way that you link burnout and the adrenals to other parts of the body and take that whole body approach, because we know how important that is as practitioners. I'm sure you're as keen on that as I am. And one of these areas that you connect is the thyroid. And in clinic, I work extensively with thyroid and adrenals. And I find that most of my patients actually have adrenal issues, be it because of the thyroid, or whether it's because of the stress of having a chronic condition, or whatever it might be. it's almost impossible kind of to work on the adrenals without working on the thyroid, and the thyroid without working on
vice versa. Yeah.
They're very interlinked. And the thyroid is one of the main pillars of the mitoimmune method that I use in clinic. Do you find that same intensity of connection when you're working with people with burnout? And can you tell us like a little bit more about that connection between the cortisol and the thyroid?
Yeah. So for the first part of the question, I think with any of my clients that come in and are presenting with those symptoms, low mood, low energy, especially in the mornings, constipation, all the other things that are wrapped around that, that could very much be burnout and be driven from, a nutrient deficiency or, a brain chemical issue. The first thing you're going to want to rule out is the thyroid anyway, because the thyroid, it could be something that's contributing. So the case presentation in my clinic is mixed. So we sometimes see thyroid issues and sometimes not, but it's something we'll always screen for, because I want to rule it out or rule it in at the beginning to understand. In terms of that connection, then, the thyroid needs a certain amount of cortisol or our stress hormone to function effectively. So cortisol can influence signaling from the brain to the thyroid gland itself, and it also influences our ability to convert from inactive thyroid hormone to active thyroid hormone. So in short, we kind of need the right amount of cortisol, which when we're burnt out, it's highly unlikely we've got the right amount. So, it may be that the point where if we're kind of completely burnt out and the adrenal output is reduced, so cortisol is low, that may occur like in the later stages of burnout. Then it may be at that point that we'll observe reduced hormone conversion, because we just haven't got enough cortisol there to support that conversion. So we've got less active thyroid hormone in circulation, which then means we're less able to carry out metabolic functions in the body, which is obviously an issue. Conversely, then, if we're kind of in those acute go stages of a stress response, or we're high cortisol stage, such as the kind of what I call stage 2 burnout, so before we kind of get to that crash point, but we're kind of living on cortisol because we're producing an awful lot. So at that stage, that can interrupt the signals from the brain, so we could actually be suppressing the release of thyroid stimulating hormone from the brain. And in that case, the thyroid isn't then getting the message to even produce thyroid hormone. So yeah, it's one of those like complicated systems where we need just the right amount. So you can it's more complex than that, as I'm sure that, you definitely are aware, but that is just kind of two examples of where this interplay between the stress hormone cortisol and the thyroid can have issues in the body. Yeah.
And they're so interlinked, aren't they? And even at the different stages, like you say, whether it be the stage of having high cortisol in sort of earlier stages, or low cortisol in later stages of burnout. And cortisol as well is very linked to the immune system. So when it's early stages, when it's high, it can suppress the immune system. We can see an increase in the thyroid antibodies. So I mean, there's so many different ways that it's connected, like with the TSH, the conversion pathways, the the immune system, the antibodies. There's just so many different connections, isn't there? And I also noticed in your book that you picked up on something that I'm very passionate about, which I kind of just wanted to bring up with you, because it's something that a lot of practitioners don't necessarily talk about so much. I know I get a lot of people coming to me with confusion over it, and that is thyroid and iodine supplementation. And I strongly advocate for people being aware of the dangers of iodine supplements when they've got Hashimoto. So particularly when they've got this autoimmune thyroid, and this is what you talk about, in the book, you touch on this. And I know a lot of practitioners who are still advocating for the use of iodine supplementation, which is sadly, it's outdated. If you look at the latest research, it is outdated research now. But you, like me, kind of pick up on this link, and that's because of this potential trigger of an autoimmune flare. And we're not just talking hypothyroid here, we're talking if people have got the Hashimoto's, the autoimmunity. And just to kind of quickly explain that for people that are listening, because they may not be aware of this, or I know a lot of people are not aware of this because they come to me in clinic asking about it all the time. But iodine can initially, it can kind of bring down TSH, and patients can kind of feel better at first, and they think that taking iodine is beneficial. But actually over time, it can kind of increase this inflammation in the body, it can increase the autoimmune response, so it can cause flares, and then we get more of the thyroid destruction over time. So overall, it puts people into a worse position further down the line, even though initially they may feel better and they think iodine is kind of working. Is that something that you've come across a lot? Do you still see a lot of people taking iodine?
I think it's mixed. It's something that we again would screen for it. So if we saw thyroid antibodies in like a blood screen, then before utilizing like a really robust multivitamin, I'd want to then test iodine levels first to kind of understand, because I wouldn't want to push that.
Vitamins, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't want to push that. And we've actually seen, in fact, in the book, there's actually a case in there where there was a client who'd kind of listened to a friend who'd been seeing another nutritionist and got this kind of multivitamin that she was taking and couldn't understand why she wasn't feeling great. And then when we but she was completely unaware that there was an issue with the thyroid. It's only then when we screened and we picked up on this potential for Hashimoto's that we're like, okay, let's get you off this multivitamin and onto something different. Because we suspected that iodine may have been exacerbating the issue. So I think it's just being aware. I think that the problem is that many people have done research, will have read about the thyroid, and will realize that iodine is one of the building blocks for thyroid hormone. And they'll also kind of read, okay, one of the drivers behind hypothyroidism might be an iodine deficiency. And that might be the case, but it may also be this autoimmune condition, which you've already alluded to. And the second problem is we live in this quick fix society where we kind of think, okay, I need the magic bullet to help me. So I'm going to go and get myself an iodine supplement. And I'm going to start popping that and all my problems are going to be solved. And I think that was because
it can feel better initially.
Exactly. You're like, yeah, you have your days, I fixed it. Yeah. I fixed myself. So I think that's it. And I think in the book, I just wanted to kind of put that word of caution out there that, and I talk about actually generally in the supplement section as well, that some of these supplements aren't the panacea that they are marketed to be. And I think if something like autoimmunity, Hashimoto's in this example, is suspected, then I do think we need to be, cautious in terms of where we're using supplements. So yeah, it's always good to chat about it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's good to just raise that awareness. It's something that I don't see many people talking about. So when I saw it in the book, it was just something I thought I want to just kind of bring it up. It helps raise that awareness for people listening. I know a lot of people listening to this will have thyroid issues, because a lot of my patients will be listening who have thyroid problems. It's nice to sort of bring those things up. So when you were talking, so another one of these links around the body that you've talked about in the book was with the immune system. And when you're talking about the immune system, you discuss red meat. And I'd love to kind of just pick up on this with you as well. It's something else that I'm hugely passionate about. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot in common. But you talk about kind of the modern farming, the grain-fed animals, and of course, the use of things like growth hormones, antibiotics, and obviously regulations vary depending on where people live and things like that. But where do you sort of stand on advising people about meat in the diet? Do you have a preference as to whether people eat meat or don't eat meat? And if they do eat meat, do you have advice that you kind of give over how to make a healthier choice?
Yeah, I think the first part, in terms of whether I have a preference whether people eat meat or don't eat meat, I think like, look, in our profession, we can't really afford to have preferences. We need to be led by the person in front of us and guide them in whichever way we think is best for them. Certain thyroid conditions, certain mood conditions, having meat in a diet, it can be super helpful to helping those individuals. So, I'm certainly not going to say that we know one way is the best way. That being said, meat can be pro-inflammatory, as you've already mentioned there, like grain-fed animals. The meat from those will generally be higher in omega-6 than omega-3, which will tip the inflammation balance unfavorably. Whereas grass-fed meat or animals that are free to roam generally tends to be higher in omega-3, so helps with that inflammation balance. So with meat, if you are a meat eater, obviously, this isn't for you if you're not, but if you are a meat eater, then I think it's quality over quantity when it comes to red meat. So buying locally, higher welfare, organic meat, and really understanding the provenance of what of where it's come from, how it's been raised, how it's been fed, and even, you know, how it's been slaughtered, really, to kind of understand all of that end-to-end process will kind of help you to understand how health promoting that meat will be for you. So that's what I'm just advocating for people, is to just be a little bit more aware of that, the food chain, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's really important to know where our food comes from, and often we don't, because it's packaged and put on a plate in front of us and no longer looks like an apple, and we don't think about it. And I think, like you said, one of the things, to pick up on something you sort of mentioned there, one of the things I always say, I get asked a lot, what's healthier? You know, is a vegan diet healthier? What is it? Pescatarian? Is it? What's the healthy diet? And my response is always the same. It actually doesn't matter whether you are carnivore, pescatarian, vegetarian, vegan, whatever it is. You can be healthy or unhealthy within any of those diets. You could be a really healthy vegan who's eating all the fresh veg and all organics and all of that sort of thing, or you could be a really unhealthy vegan who is, you know, eating processed junk food all day long, and that makes a vegan diet really unhealthy. And the same goes for, you know, the meat eater. You can be eating the really unhealthy meat products, you know, very sort of processed and all of that sort of thing, or you could be eating really good organic, you know, grass-fed, free range, all of this sort of thing that makes it a healthier diet. So there isn't, I don't feel, and it sounds like you're obviously, you know, going the same way, that I don't think there is a healthy diet, as in, you know, vegan or pescatarian or whatever. I think it's more about the choices you make within the diet that you choose, the way you choose to live your life. It's about making healthy choices within each of those individual diets. And I also think as well, that doesn't just apply to meat. I think, you know, even in terms of, you know, if we are talking sort of with vegan or vegetarian, and everybody should be eating veg anyway, but whatever diet you're on, you know, the quality of our veg is just as important as the quality of our meat. You know, veg can be sprayed with pesticides, or it can be organic and be a lot cleaner. I don't like the word cleaner, but, you know, for want of a better word, it depends on the, you know, the soil health as well. You know, if the food is organic, the soil health is better. There's more nutrients in the veg than there is if we're buying veg that's been sprayed with, you know, fertilizers and pesticides and all of this sort of stuff. So it's not even necessarily just tied down to meat.
Exactly.
It comes down really to quality of food generally, and knowing how to make those choices.
Absolutely. I think it's always quite interesting as well how often we as practitioners get asked for our opinion or the way that we personally eat, and I do still think that is kind of irrelevant, because we all have personal preferences, we all have different belief systems, and actually we as practitioners, as I said right at the beginning, are led by the person in front of us, and led by the evidence, aren't we? So like you said, you've hit the nail on the head there. It's definitely about quality with whichever eating pattern that you're currently observing, and we can only advise in terms of whether we think there needs to be tweaks here and there that might be more beneficial for them. We're just giving them that information from a purely scientific point of view, and then make our choices accordingly.
So you also talk about mitochondria, which is another one of the pillars it's one of the very big pillars in the mitoimmune method that I use in clinic, and you talk about it as your burnout M&Ms, I think you call it in the book, which is mitochondria and methylation. And so for those listening who don't know what we're talking about, because they don't know what mitochondria are, they're the organelles in the cells in your body. They're like the batteries. So they give every cell, you know, they convert the nutrients we eat to ATP. They give us energy. So they're kind of like the batteries of our cells. And I work on mitochondrial health with my clients a lot. It's obviously something that you are passionate about as well. I can tell from reading the book. But can you tell us a little bit more about the link between stress and the mitochondria and the impact that has on, you know, on our body?
Yeah, so I like the way you picked up on the burnout M&Ms. I was trying to make you know, two like biochemical processes, or if you like, a little bit more exciting. When people kind of go mitochondria, methylation, I'm like, yeah, they're just your burnout M&Ms. So yeah, you're absolutely, you hit the nail on the head there. So the mitochondria are our battery, or to use your words, or I'd call it like kind of the energy engine room of each cell. And those mitochondria are relying on key nutrients for their very function. But unfortunately, many of those nutrients are the nutrients that are depleted through stress. So when we're thinking about B vitamins, magnesium, iron, and they are nutrients that we might be consuming, but if we're stressed out, we're probably burning through them really quickly, which then means there's less fuel, if you like, for the mitochondria to function. And on the flip side, ironically, the mitochondria are actually crucial for us to be able to produce our stress hormone cortisol. So we're starting to see that kind of interplay where we're kind of in that first stages of stress, lots of cortisol circulating, nutrients getting depleted, mitochondria not functioning so effectively, less able to then produce cortisol, and then ending in that state where there's less cortisol around. So it's kind of at the heart of that cellular process. So yeah, cellular fatigue, physical fatigue, the two are definitely very much linked. Stress is also pro-inflammatory, which can create byproducts. So when we burn any fuel, we may produce toxins or free radicals as a result of that. And mitochondria are particularly susceptible to damage from free radicals. So there's lots of things going on in the stress response that can potentially impact our energy engine room from being able to produce the energy we need to function.
Yeah, and we mentioned that you call it the burnout M&Ms, and other part of that is the methylation, which is that's a biochemical process whereby this is where it gets to be a little bit scientific and not so interesting. So I love that you always a challenge to try and make the science.
We can geek out about it, can't we?
But it's the biochemical process whereby a methyl group is added to a molecule so that it becomes more biochemically active, which needs to happen. It's a process, a biochemical process needs to happen in the body. So can you sort of tell us a little bit more about why this methylation, why you've picked up on these two things, why this methylation is so important in burnout?
Yeah, so when we think about burnout, if we're feeling burnt out, it's going to affect our energy. So we're thinking about mitochondria, and it's going to affect our mood. So thinking about methylation. So as you said, methylation is that process that helps us to produce the mood regulating chemicals. And yeah, this process is happening all the time throughout the body. It's happened probably billions of times while we've been having this conversation. So I think it's important to understand that that's happening in the body, and perhaps the individuals that come to see us in clinic perhaps need to worry less about mitochondria and methylation, but they're going to be the things that are in our minds in terms of, is there a mitochondrial dysfunction issue here? Is this individual a poor methylator? And might one of these two things or both of these things be explaining why this individual has ended up where they are today? So methylation is that crucial process that, and if it's not working effectively, it can affect our sleep, it can affect our mood, it can affect our hormone balance, etc., etc. So we can't even produce, without methylation, we can't produce the first chemicals in our stress response. We also can't produce the chemicals that make us happy, keep us content, help us to sleep, and we can't make the hormones that help supercharge our nervous system. So basically, in short, I think I say it in the book that without methylation you can't beat burnout. So it's, I kind of include it at the end because it is a bit sciencey, but that's where we're kind of, we're peeling back the layers of the onion to understand what's happening with this individual. So yeah, it's basically just telling people we're doing our jobs well, right, Nicole?
And on that note, we've geeked out a little bit on the science, which I love to do. But I also want to sort of talk about, I guess, the more sort of the fun stuff for the listeners. But people obviously they want guidance on dealing with burnout, and you've got some amazing steps in the book, which you put into pillars. So you put into restore, nourish, engage, and reframe. So can you just explain for us sort of why those pillars sort of, and what those 4 pillars sort of stand for?
Yeah, so for the book, I wanted to kind of create this formula that would, make it quite simple to help either recover from or prevent burnout, and I call it my mood boosting method. And If someone was working with me in clinic, I would generally go through it in that order, because, depending on where someone is on their burnout scale, if they are completely flat out burnt out, then the first thing they're going to want to do is restore. And that is all about thinking about rest and relaxation, and just giving themselves the time to heal. And the nourish part is all about nourishing the brain and the whole body. So all those, that function that we've already talked about there, those little biochemical processes, we want to give the body the nourishment to enable them to carry that out, unbeknownst to them. And then engage is about thinking about the activities that you might have disengaged from as a result of feeling burnt out, and that might support recovery. So we're thinking about exercise, maybe hobbies, maybe socializing. And it's these things that can start to drop off when we're feeling burnt out. We're disengaging from our friends, we're perhaps not prioritizing exercise as much, and we're not, we might have dropped all our hobbies, and all we're doing is basically the bare minimum to function. So engage is about gently starting to re-engage in those activities. And then finally, then reframe is thinking about the limiting beliefs and the negative self-talk that that might be happening on a subconscious level that we're not even aware of, that may have contributed or made us more vulnerable to burnout in the first place, that if we address them, maybe then maybe protective against burnout in the future. So yeah, that was kind of a whistle-stop tour of the mood boosting method.
I think it's really important for people to understand that, because I think a lot of the time people almost assume that we just do food. Just do diet, and it's just around that kind of one pillar, I guess. And people are maybe not always aware that actually there's a lot more to functional medicine, even to nutritional therapy, lifestyle medicine, whatever it might be, whichever modality we're talking about. There's always a lot more to it than
absolutely
just food. And I think that sort of nice sort of 4-pillar framework sort of really shows people that actually one of those is about food,
but exactly
about all the other things that are involved in healing. And it's a much bigger thing than just change your diet, I'm going to tell you what to eat, and change your diet and you'll be fine. There's a lot more involved.
Absolutely. And I think you're right there. And I think there's probably an element, you asked me right at the beginning, why write the book, and with you just saying that there, and I think one of the other motivations for me was to showcase what we do in functional medicine, and showcase that it is a lot more than that. And when you introduce yourself to somebody as a nutritionist, and the first thing someone says is, oh, it's all about, what should I eat? And actually, no, we're all about understanding the root cause of what's happening in your body, and actually, the pathology that this has taken to get you here. It's all that kind of backstory. And then it's all the things that are going to make you feel better, not just what you eat, although that is going to become, that is a big part of it, but it's that whole wraparound. So yeah, you're right.
I think I get asked a lot, just like you said, if you introduce yourself as a nutritionist or whatever sort of terminology you use, and instantly you can guarantee the next question is going to be, oh right, okay, great, so what should I eat then to feel better? And it's like, it's a way more complex question than that. And I think people think there's a really easy, it's almost a bit like, I guess, the sort of which diet should I eat, the vegan, pescatarian, what should I have? It's a bit of a similar question. I think people think there's going to be sort of one answer that we're advocating and pushing, and actually we're not. It's about getting some functional testing done, getting to the root cause, finding out actually what underlying imbalances are there, what's causing you to be feeling this way. Let's deal with those so that you don't feel that way any longer. And I think sometimes that gets missed, and I think that's why it's really nice to have things like you said, like the book out and things like that, where people can actually see that there's a whole lot more to the picture than just the
absolutely.
And I love the simplicity of that as well. You created that structure. And yet also I know, even though that it sounds like you said it's a whistle-stop tour, but it sounds like quite a simple sort of structure. I also know obviously that the huge benefits that following those sort of steps are going to give to people. Could you maybe give the listeners, and I know if they want to get the full picture, obviously go and get the book, because there's tons of tips in there that are really going to help people to take those steps to feeling better. But could you give the listeners maybe one task from each pillar, maybe that they could walk away from today, implement sort of straight away, that's going to just help them to start working on, the burnout and the stress levels, and just one thing from each of those things that they could maybe walk away and implement?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one I mentioned before is restore. So when I think about restoration, the first thing that I think of from that is getting sufficient sleep. And I think that that's not new advice. Your listeners aren't going to suddenly think this is rocket science, that getting a good night's sleep is going to help them, but it really cannot be emphasized enough. So in terms of how to support themselves in doing that, I would be thinking about implementing that routine in terms of, has that being truly honest with yourself, and has your sleep routine gotten a little bit out of whack, and can you tighten up on that a little bit so that you are giving yourself 2 hours before sleep with no food, 1 hour before bed to kind of have like a ritual to kind of get your brain ready for sleep. And even more importantly, perhaps the next morning when you wake up, going and standing by a window or getting outside so that your brain knows it's daytime now, time to be awake, which will then in turn help you feel sleepy later on in the day. So that's kind of step one. Can you tighten up on your sleep routine?
Being honest, I think that's
exactly
being honest with yourself, because we all slip. I actually had a conversation with a friend, another practitioner, this morning, because we both had a really bad night's sleep last night. And it was because we were both working on the computer far too late. We know what happened. We know what caused it. And we had this conversation, and it's so easy, isn't it, to slip up, and then it's very easy to not be honest with yourself. It's like easy to wake up in the morning and be like, oh, why didn't I sleep well? And actually, I know why I didn't sleep well last night. Know?
We're all human at the end of the day, aren't we? We're none of us are perfect, and I think the more aware you can be about why these things are happening, and also like then you'll be more accepting of the fact that if you have had a bad night's sleep, then you can kind of go back and well, what could I do differently next time around? Because I've been responsible in some way for this. Okay, if your husband snores and wakes you up, or I'm using that as an example because that's what happens in my house. But these things that are or like a car alarm goes off, or something that's kind of the dog bursts in, or something that's kind of like out of your control, a small child waking you up in the night. These are the things that you can't help and can't be helped. But the things that are within your control are the things that we often kind of ignore and pretend that we're not, aren't happening. But if we're more honest about those things, then that's when we can start to put that back into place.
We don't like to admit it to ourselves, do we?
No. Exactly. So then thinking about nourish, I was in terms of like for me, the really simple thing that you can do when I'm thinking about these steps as well, and I'm thinking what are the things that you can do really quickly that are simple and probably either cost nothing or are very inexpensive. So with nourish, I always think about focusing on hydration. So if you're feeling even a little bit dehydrated, that can increase feelings of anxiety. We're not going to be efficient energy producing machines. So the thing I would prioritize for nourish is simply having a glass of water first thing in the morning before you do anything else. Simple, inexpensive. You can put that into place right now. You could even take it to bed with you tonight, so it's right there. So it's looking at you as soon as you wake up, saying, "Drink me," and that could be helpful. From an engage point of view, so kind of step 3, again, thinking simple and inexpensive, I would just say get out into nature. So we don't want to be hammering the exercise or kind of going out and start training for a marathon in our recovery, but some gentle exercise and being outdoors could be beneficial. So maybe it's just a 5-minute walk today, a 10-minute walk tomorrow, just something to kind of get you back out and re-engaging. And then finally then with reframe, so reframe I think is a bit of it's deeper work than some of the others. It's really understanding yourself and what's brought you to this point, and sometimes people aren't quite ready for that at the beginning. So it's something about at what point am I ready to kind of really understand whether these limiting beliefs have held me back. But in the short term, we can capture some negative beliefs. So simple things like I can't get through the afternoon without chocolate is an example of a negative belief that might be holding you back. So for that kind of thing, I would just encourage someone to write down 3 alternative examples that are positive, that actually are more helpful to them than, I can't get through the afternoon without this. And I've got like a really nice simple belief change tool on the website that people can utilize. if that would be helpful for them.
Yeah, we'll link your website below. So if you drop me the link for that, we'll make sure that that's linked below so people can jump onto that, because I think it'd be really useful for them.
Yeah, so it has that kind of like do at home little tools. I think are always helpful, aren't they? So
they are, and again, it is a lot about being honest with yourself as well, I think, and like we said, we're not always very good at that, but I think I think with the reframe, that sort of side of things, that sort of being mindful and things like that, it takes a little bit more time maybe to develop those tools. And
absolutely,
it's important that you use them when you're not necessarily just in a bad place.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can use them all the time, even when you feel like you're in a good place, a lot of the time people sort of drop those sort of things, those sort of tools and habits that help them, they drop them off when they think they're in a really good place. But actually, if you can keep them going when you're in a good place, when you're in a bad place and you actually really need them, they're so much easier to then implement, because it's obviously harder when you're not in such a
absolutely yeah, exactly. Well, if you're feeling burnt out, then the negative self-talk can be running rife because your mood's not great. So, and that's why it's harder to kind of dig yourself out at that point. But whereas, like you said, if you've kind of developed that self-awareness about yourself, you've implemented some of these tools and you're continuing to use them, then it can be protective. But it takes, like you said, it takes time. And I mean, burnout is not like a one and done thing either. It's something that we kind of have to work on all the time. I have to work on it all the time. How I didn't burn out writing the book about burnout, I'll never know. But so I'm definitely someone who knows from experience that you have to constantly be working at this. It's once you learn these tools, you've got to then be constantly implementing them, but also kind of be kind to yourself with that as well.
Yeah, and making it a lifestyle change rather than a sort of
quick fix.
It's a diet, isn't it? It's not like, rather than doing a diet that you're going to do for the next sort of month to go on holiday, it's about implementing a nutrition plan that is a lifestyle change. And it's the same thing with everything that we do.
Absolutely.
About developing it as a sort of a new way of life, and doing that in a way that fits into the lifestyle that you want as well. I always say that to clients and things. It's we've got to develop something that's going to work for you and fit into your lifestyle. There's no point, for example, with burnout, there's no point saying to somebody, I had a client recently who said to me, oh, am I going to have to give up my job? And I was like, no, you don't have to. The point is that we're going to build you up and get you in, have these tools so that you can do the job you love.
Yes.
But also protect your health and look after yourself. You just know how to do that and what to do about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is about those sort of lifestyle changes that fit into the lifestyle that person wants. And that's where it has to be kind of individualized, I guess.
Totally agree.
So final question, and it's the same one that I ask sort of every guest. If you could give the listeners one piece of advice, I know you've given them some steps, and if people want more of those steps around those sort of around your method, around those 4 pillars, I really, strongly advise they go and get the book, because there's tons more tips in there for them to implement. But if there was one thing that you wanted the listeners to walk away from this conversation with today, be it a piece of advice, a tip, or just a message, I guess.
Yeah.
What would be the one thing that you would really love for them to sort of take away from this conversation?
I think the main thing for me is to listen to your body. Yourself. Symptoms are that warning sign from the brain to get us to change our behavior. So burnout doesn't have to be, inevitable. And recovery and prevention aren't necessarily a quick fix, which we've just talked about. So I would just say, be kind to yourself, get to know yourself, understand your unique needs, and just take one step at a time.
I love that. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed it too. And that maybe you'll come back on and join me again sometime for another episode, because like I said, there's so many more things that I think we could deep dive into.
I absolutely loved being a guest. So thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant.
Oh, thank you for joining me. And don't forget to pick up a copy of Rachel's book. It's called Burnout Bible. You can get it in your local bookstores. It's available from online from all the main sort of retailers. It's on Amazon and everywhere else, so people can find that. We will drop the links as well for the book below, and to your website for that tool that you mentioned as well. So all of that will be in the show notes if people want to grab a copy of the book or use that tool as well for the behavior change. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation, and I will see you next week on the Good Health Podcast. If you've been listening to this episode and you think that burnout might be an issue for you, or you want to prevent burnout because you know that you live a really busy, fast-paced life, then we've got a couple of things for you. In the show notes below, we're going to link our free adrenal challenge guide. This is 12 days of steps you can take to help prevent burnout or beat burnout. And this is entirely free, so you can download this in the show notes below. If you're ready to start working on your nutrition, we've got a full week nutrition plan for you that is specifically designed for enhanced energy and balanced immunity. So this is really going to help you if you've got that really busy, fast-paced life. You know that burnout might be an issue, but you want to keep going and you want to elevate your energy to the next level. Both of these will be linked in the show notes below so that you can join now.